Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Board of Education meeting for the Bloom Carroll Local School District. Roll call, please.
Mr. Abbott?
Present.
Mr. Bratton?
Present.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Present.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Present.
Mrs. Sherman?
Number 3, pledge allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Number 4, approval of agenda. We do have a deadline. It's in your packet.
The agenda will be 9B5 and 9C16.
If there's no further discussion, can I get a motion, please?
So, second.
Motion made by Ms. Sherman, second by Mr. Bratton. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes. Number 5, approve the minutes from the February 14th, 2022 meeting. I did not see anything. I'll make the motion.
Second.
Motion made by Jimmy Johnson, second by Ron Johnson.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Number 6, public participation. A citizen granted permission to address the board shall speak no longer than 3 minutes at one time except by consent of the majority of the board members present. A maximum of 30 minutes of public participation may be permitted at each meeting. The Bloom Carroll Board of Education policy requires that individual names not be used as part of a complaint or concern being stated to the board during the public participation part of the agenda. The board rests in its president the authority to terminate any remarks which may be defamatory, abusive, or otherwise cause undue interruption or interference with the orderly conduct of business. We have 2 signed up, Mr. Henthorn, to represent BCYA.
For those of you that don't know me, my name is Josh Hanthorn. I'm current president of Bloom Carroll Youth Athletics. The reason I'm here today is kind of 3 parts. First one is to kind of give you guys an idea of the money that we're spending on facilities, mostly roller field, because that's our outside facility. In 2021, give me just a second, I'll try to be quick. Improvements to the property, like fencing, concession stand, plumbing repair, paint work, et cetera, about $7,000 was spent. Grass cutting, trash, and electric bills, $17,500. And then something that I don't consider on anyone, but porta potties for usage since we don't have restrooms there, $4,500. Just as an idea. As of February 20th, our checking account had roughly $54,000. We're expecting to spend almost 20 of that on baseball, whether it be fields, equipment, uniforms, etc. And then we start to consider soccer, grass cutting, things like that. So that $54,000 dwindles quickly. One of the reasons I'm bringing this up is recently we have an email back and forth about backstop helping for the improvement that you guys are doing to 911 and roller. And my answer was that we don't really have it, which at the time we don't. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. We do want to help. I want to throw that out there. It's just we might not have large sums at the time. So that's the first part, just informational. Second part was a question as to board policy on usage of facilities on Sunday mornings specifically. Just a clarification on, is it religious, what is it, and we would like to see that get removed if possible, not only for our sport, but for yours, because having that extra time on Sundays would be valuable for have about 300 kids registered this year. Last year we were at around 240, the year before we were around 200, so we're obviously growing quickly, and they really want those. We have
soccer team?
Yeah, soccer, so we,
Middle school
for our
soccer.
under 14, like our middle school kids right now, we had 23, so pretty much a boys team and a girls team, a single each.
So you're thinking just 7th, 8th grade?
Yeah.
Starting with middle school?
Yeah, and there's a lot of support. We have people that want to coach, people that want to fundraise, all that, so they're pushing for it. So it's something to think about. That's all I have. Thank you.
Second on the list is Mr. Green.
Good morning. I appreciate the bigger chairs. Last time I was in here, I stuck in one of those, nearly handicapped myself. I drive my son to school every day. He takes a bus on the way home because I got a real job like everybody else. One thing I've noticed on Winchester Road, there's like 4 or 5 houses right next to each other that have this like bus stop. I'm not sure, I don't know how the buses, that whole thing gets made, but I just think it's maybe a little dangerous with all those stops there. I don't know if it's allowed to confine them or not. With multiple stops literally right next to each other, the cars back up pretty quickly. I don't know if there's a solution or not. I don't know the rules behind this or whatever. Just want to bring it to your attention, especially, well, now that the sun's coming up early, it won't be as big a deal, but in the winter, you can't even, I know those buses stop there, but I personally couldn't see the kid crossing the street, and I'm like 4 or 5 cars back at that time. That's all. I just want to address that to you guys. I know it's a little concerning. I'd hate to see someone get hurt. Where I moved from, there was a guy that, late to work, decided he was gonna drive around the school bus and smoked a high school kid, and just because he was late to work, so I'd hate to see something like that.
Appreciate you.
Thanks.
Okay. Tonight we did have the elementary school 3 to 5 updates, but Mr. Rozeski was not able to attend. He will be sending out an email to Mr. Hahn, and then he will forward it, and we can include the minutes from next month. Number 7, treasurer's recommendations and reports.
Okay, item 7A is to approve the February financial statements for a total expense of $11,473,631.20, including just over $8.94 million in the consortium expenses. Within the executive summary on page 15, one of the bigger revenue months occurs in February as we're collecting the first half of the real estate tax collections and public utility as well. Final settlement occurs in March, so at that point we can make a true meaningful comparison from the current year to the prior year collections. Again, just new construction was the only thing that changed the rates going into this year, so don't anticipate too much of an increase. As we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, we're always looking at the expenditures on the green report as compared to our forecast. We're pretty close in all of them except for the supplies and materials line. And really, it's nobody's surprise, just the increase in diesel fuel costs has really hit us. And even going back 5 months when the forecast was done, we still didn't anticipate this type of increase that we saw in January, and especially February, obviously. That's part of it. The other part is we've done, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, we've taken a lot more trips this year as we've gotten a little bit back to normal with athletics and field trips. Performing arts trips, so it's not all bad, but that does account for a little bit of the increase there, and as we look at that line item. Again, the carryover is a little inflated here as we get the big revenue months, $6.46 million as of February 28th. Any questions on the financial statements or the checks written during the month?
I do not. Everybody good? I'll make the motion.
Second.
Motion made by Jimmy Johnson, second by Rod Johnson.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Item B is to approve disposal of the following assets. Per board policy requires board approval. 2 buses that we are getting rid of. Neither one of them are drivable without significant financial investment, so we're not taking any buses off any routes or any spares. And then obviously we've been talking about the modulars. We've finally gotten them removed from behind the primary school, in front of the primary school, and in Lithopolis. So request formal approval to remove these items from inventory.
Can I get a motion, please? Motion made by Jim Sherman, second by Joe Abbott.
Mrs. Sherman? Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
And Mr. Jimmy Johnson.
Yes.
And finally, requesting approval to create the following scholarship funds: the Dr. Jeffrey M. Anderson Memorial Scholarship Fund, and number 2, the Alexis Long Memorial Scholarship Fund. As you can see on page 29, before I will put any of these on the agenda for approval, we do have a pretty strict set of requirements. Certainly, these are advantageous to our students, so we're glad to administer them and account for them. But before we can do that, we have certain criteria in terms of who it's in honor of, what's the amount of the award, and what's the fiscal resources for the award, what criteria will be used to choose the recipient, and most importantly, who officially is going to make the decision of who receives these scholarships each year. If you don't have all of that in these applications, it can sometimes muddy the waters as we move forward. But very happy with these two recommendations. As you can see, they've met the parameters of our requirements from the packet before you. So we are asking approval for these two scholarship funds.
Agreed.
I'll make the motion. Second.
Motion made by Rod Johnson, second by Mr. Bratton.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
And Mr. Jimmy Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Travis. Number 8, old business. Do we have anything? Move right on to number 9, superintendent's recommendations and reports. Mr. Arnold.
So, just a few things. First of all, today, we did have a professional development day. A lot of people ask, what are you doing? A lot of parents ask questions, what types of things you've done during PD, but we have limited numbers of the professional development days during the course of the school year, but they are important because there are so many required trainings that we need to do with our staff each year. But today in particular, something that we felt was really needed was the de-escalation techniques, dealing with difficult student behaviors and how to refocus the students and get them back into the classroom as long as the behavior in question was manageable, and get the students refocused and how to just properly deal with that in regards to student behavior. We also worked on some HQSD, highly qualified student data. It is part of the new Ohio Teacher Evaluation System that's been revised, and the principals and assistant principals met with their staffs today to discuss part of that evaluation process, in which the teachers are required to use high-quality student data to inform and drive their instruction. We also worked on pacing guides and curriculum maps, meaning, what are we teaching each grading period? When you look at the state standards and you break it down into 4 quarters, what is our goal, what is our target in terms of covering these standards? So that would be our pacing guide, is how quickly or how long it takes, how many days it takes to cover, a learning target. And then just making sure that our curriculum is aligned to what the students are required to learn and what they're being tested on, especially in the state of Ohio and also in terms of graduation. At the elementary, we're also doing some guided math. It's some exploratory math kits that the teachers have had a lot of success with and that they needed more training with. We didn't have a lot of time to get them together over the last year and a half due to the pandemic, but we felt that this was a good opportunity to do that today. And then everybody in grades 3 through 12, every teacher that is administering a state test, it is required that we provide training for them and that they sign off that they received an annual training. So we did that today as well. The end of the 3rd quarter is on March 25th. It's coming up in a couple weeks, and then we're into the last 25% of the school year. The state testing does begin in late March for 3rd grade with the 3rd grade reading guarantee, the 3rd grade ELA test, and then early April for the middle school and high school. Tomorrow, high school juniors will be taking the state-funded ACT in Ohio. All juniors all juniors get one opportunity to take the ACT through a state-funded test. The other ones they do have to pay for. I wanted to let the board know, I think we're headed into good territory here, but I wanted to let the board know that Governor DeWine did sign back into law House Bill 51. It's a bill that allows a public body, including the Board of Education, to temporarily meet remotely until June 30th. So if there was a conflict or something popped up, if you had to attend remotely, you could do that through June 30th. You would count towards the quorum, and you could vote once again. I'm not sure where it came from. I think it was more legislation back in December and January, and then things quickly got better here from January on, but just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. The high school musical, The Addams Family, the kids have been working really hard. I'm really excited for the performing arts program at the high school. These kids some of them were in middle school when their play was canceled 2 years ago. The night before, they were set to go on stage. So these kids are super excited. They worked really hard. That'll be taking place March 24th through the 26th. So to get an opportunity to attend, it'll be in the middle school auditorium. The Governor's Youth Art Exhibition, it's a state judging every year that's held. Thousands of pieces of artwork are submitted, and we had, I think, 4 students that were, whose work qualified for the exhibit, and I just wanted to congratulate those Bloom Carroll High School students, London Herbert, Allie Carter, Sydney DeSalvo, and Sophia Guglielmato. It ended up London and Sydney, out of over 6,000 pieces, or I'm sorry, London and Allie Carter both had some pieces selected to be in the actual competition. So congratulations to those students. Right to Read Week took place February 28th through March 4th. There was a lot of just fun learning activities, a lot of reading and competition taking place, especially in the K-5 buildings. It was neat to see different buddies paired up and different grade levels paired up, and that was something that's really nice, having this building where 4th or 5th graders could read the kindergarten or 1st grade. We had high school students come out and read. I know there were some staff members, Mr. Young, myself, a few other people. Brad Smith, the Greenfield Township Fire Chief, came over to read to some students during Right to Read Week, but it was just a good event and something that we always need to continue to emphasize the importance of with developing our readers, our youngest readers. And then I'm hoping this is going to be my last COVID update ever. I just wanted to let you know that ODH sent us a notice, sent the superintendents a notice on March 10th, that K-12 schools are no longer required to report cases to the health department. Parents are no longer required or asked to report COVID cases to the schools. We are no longer required to have a COVID coordinator. And of course, we haven't been required to send notices out unless we have an outbreak or a cluster of cases determined by the health department. And in fact, the state of Ohio is transitioning to not daily COVID reporting, but a weekly monitoring, similar to other infectious diseases. So that was probably an email that made me feel like we're really, really close to being back to normal. So I think that's it for my update. Any questions?
As far as the student
You stay home. You stay home until they're fever free. They are asked to stay home for 5 days. The Ohio Department of Health wanted to do that if it is COVID. If your child tests positive for COVID, they wanted them to stay out 5 days. They recommend, health officials recommend you should wear a mask after that up to day 10. That's not something that, this is a parent's choice at this time in this school district, unless you guys want to go a different direction. So that's it. Any questions? Okay. All right. Let's move on here to 9B, Superintendent's recommendations and reports for student programs. Number 1, approve a summer intervention program for students identified at risk at the elementary school to focus on reading for grades 1 and 2 and reading and math for grades 3 and 4 to be held June 6th through the 9th and June 13th through the 16th from 9 to 11. Number 2, approve a summer intervention program at the middle school for academically at-risk students to be held June 13th through the 24th. Number 3, approve the 2022-23 high school registration guide and approve the 2022-23 middle school registration guide. From the addendum, 9B5, approve the attendance of the following foreign exchange students at the high school for the 22-23 school year. And that would be Elsa Lou Risi from Switzerland and Elizabeth Revsbeck from Denmark. That's, not a C.
Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
I'll second. Motion made by Jim Sherman, second by Jimmy Johnson.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, in 9C, personnel and employment, approve substitute list number 7 for March 2022, as submitted by the Fairfield County ESC. Number 2, approve the voluntary transfer of Mariah Storts, the Special Services Secretary and District Registrar, on a 1-year limited contract in step 5, effective with the 22-23 school year, to fill the vacancy created by the retirement resignation of Michelle Scott. Number 3, approve the following personnel to provide kindergarten screenings on June 6th, 7th and 8th at the tutor hourly rate, and that would be as listed there, A through K. Number 4, approve the following 2022 summer custodial workers to be employed on an as-needed basis in A through G. Number 5, approve the following request for an FMLA leave of absence for Rebecca Rovers, beginning February 7th for up to 60 days. Joey Conrad, beginning February 14th for up to 60 days. Cody Carpenter, beginning April 7th for up to 60 days. And number 6, approve the following request for an unpaid leave or dock day for Carolyn Kaup, January 20th in 2022 and March 3rd, 2022. Nancy Borgen, an elementary school cook, February 23rd, 2022. And Corey Arnold, a middle school teacher, on April 12th, 2022. Number 7, approve Greg Mitchell to provide 11 hours of home instruction during the 21-22 school year at the tutor hourly rate. And number 8, approve Amber Harris to provide 9 hours of home instruction during the 21-22 school year at the tutor hourly rate. Number 9, approve the request of Hillary Stokes, lunchroom monitor at the elementary school, for an unpaid leave of absence effective March 15th through June 2nd, 2022. Number 10, amend the following 21-22 athletic supplemental contracts pursuant to verification of experience. That would be for John Norman, varsity assistant track, Group C, from step 0 to 1, and Kevin Miller, varsity assistant track, Group C, from step 0 to 1. Number 11, amend the 21-22 athletic supplemental contract for Adam Sharrow, 7th grade softball coach, from 100% stipend to 50% stipend. Number 12, approve the following athletic supplemental contracts for 21-22 school year, pending receipt of verifications and background checks. And that would be for Jeremy McKinney, weight room supervisor, David Polly, JV softball, and Lonnie Cush Jr., 7th grade softball. Number 13, approve the following athletic supplemental contracts for the 22-23 school year, pending receipt of verifications and background checks for Jeremy McKinney, weight room supervisor, Group C, experience, step 18. Number 14, approve the following athletic department volunteers for the 21-22 school year, pending timely receipt of all verifications and background checks for Matt Baker with middle school baseball. Number 15, approve the list of school volunteers for the 21-22 school year, pending receipt of background checks. From the addendum, 9C16, approve Nadeline Weimer as a long-term substitute teacher for Travis Ruckman at the middle school, effective March 22nd, 2022, for the remainder of the 21-22 school year, and pending acceptance of agenda item 9F8.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion made by Joe Abbott, second by Rod Johnson.
Was it you?
That was
Mr. Pratt. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Bratton.
It did sound like,
Yeah.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
9D, contracts and agreements. Approve an alcohol and substance abuse program agreement with Fairfield Medical Center effective March 2022 for 1 year. That's who conducts our drug testing for our high school student athletes. It's the same agreement we typically have on here every year. D2, approve a master service agreement with Meta Solutions for fiscal services, EMIS support, InfoHio library services, and progress book services, effective July 1, 2022 through June 30th, 2023.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Motion made by Jimmy Johnson, second by Rod Johnson.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Nothing under 9E, 9F, personnel resignations and retirements, except the resignation of Mariah Storts, elementary school head cook, at the end of the 21-22 school year, contingent on approval of agenda item 9C2. Number 2, accept the resignation of Mitchell Gangler, custodian at the preschool and learning center, effective June 30th, 2022. Number 3, accept the resignation of Keely Springer, JV softball coach, with 50% of the stipend, effective immediately. And number 4, accept the resignation of Josh Roach, JV softball coach, with 50% stipend, effective immediately. And on the next page, page 5 at the top, accept the resignation of Curtis Wade Bartholomew, high school teacher with 8 years of service to the district at the end of the 21-22 school year.
Can I get a motion, please?
Second.
Motion made by Jim Sherman, second by Jim Abbott. Roll call.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes. Number 6, at this time we'll adjourn from a regular session and go into executive session for the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of an employee, official, or student for the investigation of charges or complaints against such individual. Can I get a motion, please?
Second.
Motion made by Rod Johnson, second by Matt Bratton. Roll call, please.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
And Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes. Time is 6:27. We will be moving across the hallway.